This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. Well, of course I'm having a Black Friday sale and a Cyber Monday sale. And for that matter, I'm going to add a Saturday and a Sunday Black Cyber Thanksgiving Thank You Very Much sale. And I have to give a shout out to our Puritan forefathers for the timing of Thanksgiving, because right now is when we're coming out with a whole new set of courses for Renegade University. We have the first 4 lectures in the Renegade History of the United States video lecture series done by me. We also have an upcoming webinar I'm really excited about. It's on December 6th. It's on the history of World War II, or I should say, the new revisionist history that certain historians in Europe have been writing about that I've been developing in the book I'm writing, Blood and Freedom, on the history of the United States in the world, but that very few Americans and even very few American historians know about. You're going to learn things about the United States and its participation in World War II that you will not believe, but that are true. That's in the upcoming webinar on December 6th. It's called World War II, The Great Blowback. So you can get 20% off on all of those courses, all those webinars, all the lectures at thaddeusrussell.com/courses by using the promo code Thanksgiving. And then here's the best deal. For annual subscriptions to the Unregistered Underground, where you can get access to the private Facebook group where we have all kinds of fascinating debates and conversations every single day about all sorts of issues. We have signed copies of Renegade History of the United States. We have access to the webinars and Renegade University lectures and a whole host of other merchandise, including coffee mugs, t-shirts, hoodies, baseball hats, you name it. All those things are available to members of the Unregistered Underground. Right now, between now and Monday at midnight, if you go to the site unregisteredunderground.com and use the promo code Black Friday, that's Black Friday, one word, you'll get 50% off annual subscriptions. That's 50% off any annual subscription to the Unregistered Underground. So for Renegade University courses, go to thaddeusrussell.com/courses, and to join the Unregistered Underground for 50% off, go to unregisteredunderground.com. Someone said to me that I should do a special Thanksgiving episode this week, and I thought at first, that's corny, I wouldn't do that. And then I thought again, and it's always good to think twice. And I realized that actually I have a lot to be thankful for that I hadn't been very clear about until now. I realized that what I am thankful for is letting go. Letting go of a lot of things that kept me from seeing better possibilities for me, and maybe for the world, but certainly for me. So when I was in high school, I used to have dreams of having 3 kids and a wife in a house. It was going to be a craftsman house in a neighborhood that looked a lot like South Berkeley, and everything was nice and pleasant. And I was going to be either a journalist or a college professor. I was really attached. I had dreams about this, really attached to being in a family, having my own family, of course, obviously, or most likely because of the fractured, chaotic nature of my own family that I grew up in. It was a response to that, I'm sure, at least in part. But I clung to that. That was my goal. That's what I needed to do, needed to be. And it took me many, many years to let go of that. I also, because of my parents and my family and the culture, not just of them, but of Berkeley at the time, I needed to be a fighter for social justice. And more specifically, I needed to be a socialist, and a particular kind of socialist, the right kind of socialist. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but that's why I went to college, and that's why I went to graduate school, was to learn a few things: how to be a socialist, how to fight for social justice, what those things mean, and also so that I could get a job as a college professor and live in that craftsman house on that leafy street in a town that looks a lot like Berkeley. That was the dream I clung on to for years and years and years and years, all the way through my 20s and well into my 30s. And I got pretty far toward that dream. I overcame a lot of obstacles to get it. That's how tightly I held on to that dream. I, of course, went to graduate school, got a PhD from Columbia, which sets you up as well as it is possible to become a professor. I got married and I had a kid. And when my son was born, or I should say pretty much until the day or two, maybe the day after he was born, I was convinced that I needed to have 3 children still. But yeah, I got over that pretty quickly because I was overwhelmed by the work, the responsibility, the anxiety, the stress, loving my son constantly, totally, all day, every day, especially during those first few weeks. I was just telling a friend of mine who's just had a baby son born, that I think 7 or 8 of the top 10 moments of my life were in the first month of my son's life because of him. But simultaneously, as I always said to people, I love my son, but I hate parenting. And that's still true today, 15 years, 16 years later. I love my son as much as I ever have, but I hate parenting. Although I have to say parenting's a little easier now. Still, I hate it. So I gave up. I let go. I let go of one of the things I thought that I needed. Not just wanted, but I thought I needed. I let go of having more than one child. Someone said to me at that time, having one child is conventional warfare. Having 2 is nuclear. And they're right. But I was still married, and I, over time, realized that I had been suppressing constantly in my mind just the fact that this was not a person or the person I wanted to be on my dying bed with. I would have fantasies about when I'm sick and dying and I'm in the hospital bed, it's my last days, who would I want to come see me at the bedside? And this is a hard thing to say, but I realized it wasn't her. This is not to say that she's a bad person at all. It just wasn't there, that thing. I had forced it, and I had stopped myself from doing other things that probably would have been better for me. Having a freer life, having more and different relationships, having more and different experiences, having more fun, having more freedom. I stopped myself from having those things because I clung on. I held on to, I gripped tightly this dream, I guess, that I thought was a need. Unfortunately, after my son was born, she began to have a sort of similar, what she thought was need to have more than one child. And I had changed my mind already, but I allowed myself to be talked into having a second child. I don't know if it's wise to say this publicly. I've never said this to most people I know, much less in public. When my wife was pregnant with what would have been our second child, I almost accidentally ran into another woman. And having an affair or doing anything like that, even though I was dissatisfied with my marriage, was such an alien concept to me. It just seemed impossible, but something just snapped, broke. There was a night, and it happened, and it felt like I had no choice at that point. I talk about agency a lot, historical agency, the agency of even people like slaves and prisoners, concentration camp prisoners, inmates. They have agency. I felt like I had no agency. I felt completely swept away for the first time in a very long time, many, many years. I felt someone love me, touch me in that way. And I had actually forgotten what that was like because I didn't have that with my wife. She was unable to give me that at all. And again, she's not evil. It's just, she's not built that way. It's something I just couldn't get from her. And I got it from this person, this woman, very young woman. Now that we're being ridiculously honest, we may as well go all the way. I was 42 and she was 24. It was classic, of course. I know, cliched midlife crisis. And it became, as many people told me, it would a complete catastrophe and 3 of the worst years of my life, and horribly toxic relationship that was doomed to fail pretty much from the beginning. However, it caused me to let go of a marriage that I was committed to for no good reason. I let go of a commitment, a perceived need that was stopping me from living fully. To have denied myself what I got in those moments with that other person for the rest of my life, I mean, that's a real tragedy. So I don't regret that at all, as much pain as it brought to me and my son, especially. Here's the good news. My wife said that when she found out about it, and I left her, she said she was glad. She was glad she didn't have to deal with me anymore, she said. And that's pretty much been true ever since. I mean, she's not really seemed to care much about what I did, but I gave up. I let go. And I experienced a freedom that in the short term was terribly painful and pretty destructive of my own life and certainly my son's life. However, not only did I get this feeling that I was denying myself from holding on to something that I shouldn't have, I was also denying my son a better life in the long run. And now I know that. This is now 9 years later, and I have a very different life now. I'm with a very different person, different woman who is wonderful and is wonderful with my son and has just brought to him a whole world. She's brought herself, she's brought her life, her culture, her family, her friends, new ways of thinking, improvements on the ways that I thought. I've changed my mind about parenting, about life in general, and I'm really glad I had these new experiences with these other people that I wouldn't have had otherwise if I'd stayed married, that my son has. He's had a very, very rich life, and I'm not denying the pain of the divorce, and I've felt horrific, the worst pain of my life, the guilt about being divorced, not about her, but about him. And I think that was a lot of projection on my part of my own sadness about my parents' divorce, which happened when I was 5. My son was 7 when it happened. I remained always committed to him, always a good father, as good as I could be. But there was a freedom. You know, we talk about freedom a lot on this show. We talk about freedom a lot in America. We talk about freedom as a value. Of course, that's sort of central in my work. If you know anything about me and you've ever read anything I've written, I probably used that word somewhere describing what people were achieving and something that implicitly we should value. Well, I got it. I got freedom, or at least I got a lot of freedom. And it was terrible at first, but I am now really glad. It's letting go. I used to say that it was like my divorce going into that affair where I felt like I had no choice, no agency. It felt like I was riding in a very comfortable airplane, like a 747, and there were waitresses serving me drinks, and we were in first class, and everything was comfortable. And I just all of a sudden decided to jump out the window. And I really felt like I was skydiving, and I wasn't sure I had a parachute for 3 years there. I didn't know if I would just hit the ground and splat, both with this woman I was with and with my career and financially. I thought I'd be homeless. I had no idea. But I did get through it. And again, it was a horrible time, but I let go, and I'm really glad for that. It's something I can say now, I think. Well, okay. So I also needed to be a socialist. I needed to fight the good fight. I needed to help other people. That's what I was told that one should do. Help other people. It's never specified which people or how we know there are certain people who need help, or, wondering whether we're presuming that they would want our help. None of that. I knew I needed to help people, and socialism was the way. And so I threw myself into that as well because I needed to do that. It was a need. And I actually had a friend in graduate school at Columbia who wasn't from a very similar family, almost identical. In fact, his parents were in the same exact political organization that my parents were in. He remained, and still, I believe, remains committed to that politics and that way of life. I think he does. I think he's some sort of union bureaucrat. I pretty immediately could see that that's I don't find that admirable. I find it kind of sad, in fact. But yeah, quickly, this was the easy thing to let go of because I pretty quickly saw that socialists and leftists and political people generally were just not very much fun. I didn't like being around them. And I've talked about this a lot, so I don't need to go into it. But I gave up on that. And then intellectually, of course, you know this story very well. If you've read anything I've written, pretty much. It didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense. That's what it was. It was the dishonesty. I kept seeing dishonesty among people who I believe were the smartest and best people in the world. You know, these were these super educated people at Columbia and Harvard, Yale, who also had the correct politics. And I saw more and more and more dishonesty and more detachment from the life, the world all around me on the streets, in the lives of real people. I saw lying. I saw gross exaggerations. I saw melodrama substituting for analysis. I saw moralism substituting for argumentation. And I bet a lot of you know what I'm talking about. You know, this is what we're seeing constantly today. It's the dishonesty that really, really bothers me. And it bothered me then. And I think that's why I left the left. I turned away. I let go. Thank God. Because if I hadn't let go, my name would be Timothy Snyder, and I would be a professor of history at Yale University, an eminent, award-winning professor of history, scholar, author of many prominent books in Eastern European history. And I would be putting out videos on YouTube, as Timothy Snyder just did last week, talking about how Russia stole American democracy, how we have lost our sovereignty as a nation, how the election was determined by Russia, which spent perhaps $150,000 on Facebook ads. I watched that video, and you should look at it immediately. It's only 15 minutes long. This is the elite. This is the cream of the crop in our culture. This is the most educated person. This is the smartest person. This is person who teaches at our finest institutions. And I just watched him and I just thought, okay, he's not lying. I mean, there's some part of him that has to know that nothing he said made any sense. But I think in watching him, because he certainly seems sincere, and by the way, he's like many other history professors over the last year who first were talking about how Trump was a Nazi or a fascist or a Klansman. And I would say to them right back on Twitter or wherever, I'd say, are you sure about that? You happen to be a historian of the United States, and you're saying that this is a Klansman. There's no difference between what Trump is saying and what the Grand Wizard was saying in 1924. Yeah, and I'd get no answer from them, but they would keep doing it. Even when the evidence kept coming in that this was not the case, or the lack of evidence that Trump actually never has said anything that's actually definitely racist. He might be a racist, but there is nothing I am aware of that he has stated publicly that can unambiguously be categorized as racist, almost according to any definition of racism, in fact. Nonetheless, they kept doing it. And this is what was so, and it's still sort of curious to me, but I think the way to understand why these professors, these experts, these smartest people continue to say these things. And I was just listening to Terry Gross on NPR, you know, another one of these people. These are the smartest, most rational members of our society. And they're still holding on to, clinging to, really, it's at this point a fantasy. It's a fantasy. There is pretty much no relationship between their fantasy and the evidence that's available. It's really phenomenal. I think it's because they've been holding on to these ideas that people like Trump are evil, that the Republican Party's evil, that particular way of speaking about race and gender and sex, which is simply what Marxists used to call bourgeois liberal values or etiquette, is just right and proper. And if you don't speak in those ways, you are the devil. You are Bull Connor. You're the Grand Wizard of 1924. You are all the villains of old America that we got rid of. And we're so ashamed of it. We can't let it come back. I think they just were so tightly gripped to that set of notions that they began to convince themselves of something that's not happening. I think I did that too for a while when I was trying to play that game. That's what ideology does, I think, to a lot of people. you internalize it so deeply that you sort of know for a second that you turned that page a little too quickly that had the piece of evidence that was contrary to your argument. You turn that page a little too quickly, but you put that thought aside right away and you go on to find the next piece of evidence that will support your argument. It is remarkable. The smartest people can be that committed to a set of ideas that they will violate kind of the central principles of their occupations. We're talking about professors and journalists here. So I would recommend to them, think a little bit. Think about what your values are and whether or not this ideology or this way of thinking you're holding on to so tightly is going to serve your big values, the things that you value the most, like your life. Like your life. Do you value your life over racial etiquette, speaking about Black people in particular ways? Do you value your life over a Democrat being president of the United States? Do you value your life over Hillary Clinton being president of the United States? I certainly do. So this one's not hard for me, but I don't think they've been forced to answer that question because they behave as if they don't value their own life over having Hillary Clinton as president. I really mean that. And I think it's because they don't have any skin in the game yet, because no bombs have dropped here in their lifetime. They've never been at war. They've never seen a war. They've never heard a war. They've never felt it. I bet none of their family members have been in a war, at least their immediate family members, because good bourgeois liberals don't go to war. They're not the ones who do the fighting. So I want them to think about that. I wish I could have some access to them directly, to Timothy Snyder or Terry Gross or the editorial board of the New York Times, that paper I used to want to work for. I let go of that too. I let go of that. The New York Times now, in my view, and this is really something that it's sort of this untold just catastrophe that it's right out there in the open and no one's talking about it. The implosion of the New York Times, the most prestigious, not just newspaper, media organ in American history. When I was coming up, the New York Times was the Bible. It's not that I believed everything was true in the New York Times, but certainly believed that it was credible and more credible than any other media source. And now, every day, I get a news alert, every day in my email box from the New York Times saying that something might have happened, according to unnamed sources in a particular unnamed agency somewhere in Washington, D.C. It is that vague, and they've been doing this for more than a year now. They are remarkable. The stories in the politics section of the New York Times for more than a year now have been, I would say, of lesser quality, according to journalistic standards, than Fox News, which is saying something. I am no fan of Fox News. The New York Times has sunk to a level where they have no credibility at all. And these are the best trained journalists in the country. That is the best job still. That is still the top job to get in journalism. These are our smartest people, our best writers in terms of journalism. And I think a lot of them have, again, made themselves believe this stuff. They've internalized it. And the only way I can explain that is that they have held on too tightly to a way of thinking that stopped them from thinking about other things that are even more important, perhaps, like their own lives, like avoiding war with Russia, like avoiding a nuclear war. That used to be our greatest fear. At least we used to say we feared that when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. That was a thing. That was a real thing. We were really worried. There was a movement, really, truly worried about nuclear war. It was a possibility. There were missiles pointed in our direction, many of them, and they're still there. Those missiles are still there, but no one seems to be worried about that. Now, I'm not suggesting that there's any danger of Putin sending one of those missiles our way anytime soon, but don't we always want to be moving away from that possibility, not toward it? Don't we want to be always moving away from that possibility and doing everything we can to not provoke a war? Now, again, if you truly value the independence of one part of Ukraine, which, by the way, has many, many ethnic Russians in it who clearly want to be part of Russia. But nonetheless, you value the independence and sovereignty of Ukraine or Estonia or Lithuania or Latvia. If you truly value those things, and by the way, I'm not even talking about casualties. I'm just talking about the political independence and sovereignty of those nation states, which are modern entities. God did not create those countries. Those were established within the last few centuries. If you value the political independence of Estonia over your own life, then go right ahead and keep reporting what you're reporting. Keep saying loudly on MSNBC every night that we are at war with Russia. Keep saying that Putin has stolen our democracy, that we no longer have sovereignty, that Russia is controlling our country. Keep saying that Putin wants to change the world we live in, wants to steal what we have. Keep saying that, because you'll get what you want. Keep saying that we should have our military in bases all over Europe, right up against the border with Russia. Keep saying that we should even expand NATO further. We should expand it down to the south and up around to the east through Asia. NATO should ultimately surround Russia entirely. Russia, whose economy, I think it's even smaller than California's economy. The only thing they have is weapons. That's the only thing they have. They are absolutely incapable of being a major player in world politics, except by pushing a particular button. Let go. Let go of these ideas that were born inside your head, that came from books, that came from lectures in an Ivy League lecture hall, that came from your parents who were probably in those same lecture halls. These came from inside your head, these ideas that you're holding on to, that I think if you keep pushing them will ultimately threaten your own life. But here's the problem. They ultimately threaten my life. So that's why I'm a little upset. I'm so glad I let go. So glad I let go. So that's what I'm thankful for. Happy Thanksgiving. If you want to support this show, there are two ways to do it. You can make a simple donation by going to thaddeusrussell.com/podcast, or you can become a supporting listener of the show and a member of the Unregistered community by going to unregisteredunderground.com. When you become a supporting listener, you'll become a member of a private Facebook group where every single day we talk and argue about the issues and ideas from the episodes of the show. You'll also get discounts on Renegade University videos and courses, including the upcoming webinar on postmodernism, and on our new unregistered merchandise. Again, to become a supporting member of the Unregistered community, please go to unregisteredunderground.com. This was the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell.